So thank you for coming. I'm happy to talk about this work that you see in the gallery, and I think it's maybe in the case of this project, it's really helpful to have a little bit more of the context. Often when we're dealing with works that are either research-based or historical in nature, it's good to have a little bit more information. And also maybe know a little bit more about the process that was involved in creating the work. So that's the advantage of being able to talk about your work. At the same time, I think that it should speak for itself. So I hope that everybody here has had a chance to not only see the photos, but also have seen the video, which is not playing right now, but normally plays right behind me. Has anyone not seen it? And you didn't? Okay, so maybe at the end, we can put it on? Okay, because I will just show like a couple of stills. And I think in this exhibition that the video is really key work. It shows what we're seeing in the photographs, but I think the issue of time is quite relevant. It's a very slow, contemplative video where we see archaeologists working on a ruin site. So before I will get into like the New World, I'm gonna go back a little bit, but not too far, to show you a few works that I had already produced, to give you an idea of the different themes that I'm addressing in my practice. So these are two photographs from a series called Recreational Spaces. And I would say that this body of work was probably my first important photo project as an artist. And it was one that took me traveling quite a bit to different tourist sites or cultural sites or historic sites around North and South America, where I was, as Lynn was describing in my biography, looking at the cultural significance of these places. And as a photographer, I work within a documentary style. So detail is very important, the point of view, the perspective. Basically, the amount of information within the photographic image is a really important aspect of the visual approach. So these images normally in the gallery are larger, a bit larger than the two that we see on the wall here. And so when you're looking at the photographs in the physical space, you have a little bit of an idea of what it might like to be there. Of course, you cannot completely replicate that experience in the art gallery, but the certain amount of detail helps. So these two places, you might look at them and think that they're really, really quite different. Las Vegas, for example, it's a city. It's full of what we'd call the built environment. There's a lot of artificiality. There's a lot of critical writing that's been done about Las Vegas and the idea of the spectacle. Next to it, we have Machu Picchu, Peru, which is an archaeological site in South America. So it was an ancient Incan town that had been abandoned just before the Spanish conquest. And then it lay hidden for several decades until it was, well, I would say, rediscovered by some archaeologists, professors who were American. And then excavated with more care than maybe some of the sites that had been discovered during the conquest. So these two images, which you might think are showing two very different places, for me, what I was interested in was the idea of human settlement. The site of Machu Picchu, though it appears to be very spiritual or maybe natural, if we look at it in quite detail, it's not a natural site at all. It is a place that was meant to live in. And Las Vegas, what I found interesting about that is that it is completely artificial. It's built in a desert, yet it attempts to sort of replicate this idea of nature. So through the planting of palm trees or these artificial bodies of water, and in the case of my image, looking at how this particular site here, which is the Venetian Hotel, is trying to replicate the canals in Venice. So I'm looking at this idea of human settlement in a really, through a really large lens. It's pretty big in scope. And the entire series, Recreational Spaces, I had this site on my list for quite some time, but it was such a long project in scope, I was very patient about finally making my way there. And so L'Anse aux Meadows National Historic Site is in Newfoundland, the most easterly province in Canada. And I chose that location without having been there through my research because I knew it was the settlement that the Vikings had created when they first came to North America. And there's evidence of that. There was archaeological evidence that was discovered in 1960 that had proven that some Europeans were here before Christopher Columbus. But when I went there to make this photograph, and usually recreational spaces with maybe 1 or 2 images of one place, so that would form a greater collection, I realized that the character of the site was very different from anything else that I had photographed before. It was extremely subtle, and so as you can see in the image, in terms of the built environment, there isn't that much to see. There are people. When I first went there in 2007, there weren't very many, so maybe there's a couple of tourists here, a couple of tourists there, and there was, of course, a museum built on site. But instead of trying to find a way to make this fit within that body of work that I was already working on, I decided instead maybe it could be the starting point for something new. And so that's often how I progress from one project to another. I end with an image, and then the next image becomes the beginning of a new project. And so you'll see that this all connects by the time we get to the new world, and we'll probably end up coming back to the beginning. So this project that I'm talking about, it definitely relates to this that we're seeing in the walls, which is inspired by Viking Age history. So there's the connection between the Vikings who settled in North America, the ruins that we see in the photographs and in the videos, and this idea of the New World. So the New World referring directly to North America. But it wasn't this project right away that I jumped into. It was actually a book project titled Unmarked Sites that I worked on from about 2007, so my first visit to Newfoundland, photographing up until 2009, and then publishing as an artist book in 2011. So what we're hearing here, what we're seeing is a page from the artist book, which I brought, and we can, I'll pass it around in a few minutes. And I brought the book also so that you can get an idea of the scale. I'll just open to this page. So it's not a very big book. It's not like a monograph. It was, I decided to make it small so that it would refer to maybe a travel log or a guidebook, because essentially that's what the project does. It takes the reader or the viewer on a journey to many cultural sites around Newfoundland and Labrador. So what you see on the map, the little red crosses, those are marking the locations in which that I photographed and which the photographs appear in the book. And there is text. This is just an introductory text that actually jumps off from the Viking story, that around the year 1000, these Viking seafarers they're going en route to Greenland, and they are blown off course and discover new land. So this sort of idea of a chance settlement or a chance colonization. And so here are some of the photographs from this project, in which I focus very much on more on historical sites rather than touristic sites, although often there is a crossover between the two. And I would say this is also where I started photographing with what I call more of like an archaeological eye. So previous to this, and as you saw in the first 2 images, the perspective that I was taking was a little bit farther back, a little bit higher up. So it was more about seeing as much as you could within one single image, whereas in these photographs, it's more about the detail of the archaeological site, the subtlety or the play between presence and absence. In this book, there aren't only photographs of archaeological sites, but I juxtapose them with some images of contemporary settlements in Newfoundland. This is a community called François, or as they say in Newfoundland, they say François. And it's still considered it is an outport community. So what an outport community means is that you can only reach it by boat or by helicopter. Or in winter it is possible, but not very convenient to reach it by skidoo. And so this kind of community, it's very rare. It's rare anywhere in the world, not just in Canada or in Europe. And in the 1960s in Newfoundland, they had, many of you might know about this, there's been many artworks that have been done about it, but a resettlement program where they moved houses from outport communities to more centralized areas. So François, it was the one community that survived the resettlement program. And when I look at a site like this or I go there to photograph it, I'm thinking of it in terms of being a living museum. Sort of like a historic site that hasn't quite become historic yet. The chances of its future survival are really low, and that's just due to changing demographics and the fact that there aren't very many kids there in the aging population. So here are a couple of images from the book. So small photographs with text. I mentioned before the idea of a guidebook or travelogue. So there are what I would call like field notes that discuss different aspects of what I saw there in Newfoundland in relation to some of the images that appear there. And this photograph, which appears on a fold-out page, it's the most easterly point in Newfoundland. So does anyone know the most easterly point? Yes, I thought you might know, Tanya. Yeah. Yeah, so Cape Spear is the most easterly point, and what that means is that, or what it meant to me was that it is the closest point to the Old World. And this project was very much about the relationship between the people who live there now and the European influence. The people who came there either for whaling or fishing or to collect resources. So that brings me back to this place, this Lanceau Meadows, which became the inspiration for that book, but actually never appears in it. Most people don't even notice. The reference is there over and over again in the text, but there's actually no image of Lanceau Meadows. When I first went there in 2007, I did photograph it. I went back in 2009, I photographed it again, and I was never satisfied with the images that I was getting. But I did spend a lot of time there, and I happened to pick up this book from the museum bookstore. It's called the Vinland Sagas, and it's part of the collection of the Icelandic sagas, which is a really important literary tradition that came out of Iceland that talked about the settlement of Iceland and their explorations, so the explorations of the Icelanders. And one of those stories, the Vinland Sagas, does talk about the journeys that these Norsemen, or these Vikings, as many people would call them, of their journeys to the New World. And so I read this book, and so it told the story about these voyages going across the sea, going to Greenland first, then being blown off course and discovering what is essentially Newfoundland today that we know. And then that one story ended and a second story began, and it was the same story all over again, except some of the events were different. So basically, historically, the one was not necessarily coherent or accurate with the other. And I was a bit confused about this. So, I read it again. It's not very long, it's about 50 pages per story. And I realized actually what was essentially the key aspect about the sagas is that they're retelling historical events, but they are in fact stories or narratives that are told are being retold by people who have heard these stories maybe 200 or 300 years later. So it was two different authors trying to tell of the same stories. So I thought that this was very interesting, this idea of it being both a historical document and a fictional narrative. And it also made me think about my own relationship to photography as an artist. I use photography in what we would call like this documentary style that has so much detail that you can't really dispute what was in front of the camera. But there are other things that you will never know, like for example, when that photograph was taken exactly, or what is outside the frame, and what is the perspective of the person behind the camera.